I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello, everyone. We're listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I'm your host, Rachel Dalton, coming at you in a really great mood for some reason. I woke up at 6 a.m. this morning, and I had to run an errand for work, and woke up so I could do some things before that because I just was feeling lazy as fuck last night. So I got up at 6 a.m. I did some stuff around my apartment, and then I left early to go and drive out to do what I had to do for work. And then I got to the office at 9, and yeah, I'm in a really good mood for some reason. I mean, I guess that's a good thing, right? I don't know why I said for some reason. Life's okay. I guess that's the reason. I've actually been in a pretty good mood all week. I'm going to give the credit to a couple 60-degree days that we've had in the middle of February. And today it's snowing, so drastic changes. Almost feels like I'm back home in Michigan. Okay, so following up from last week, I did a shout out on both TikTok and Reddit, which are my social medias of choice at this current moment, just to get a sense of, people who have had their relationships impacted by the pandemic. What happened? What were the reasons? And based on the research that I did and the information that I gleaned from others, it kind of came down to a few main themes. And I'm not surprised by any of them. So, number one, it's important to point out that, as we mentioned last week and as everybody knows, spikes of breakup and divorces were completely up in 2020. And I don't know what the data is in 2021 or thus far in 2022. It's probably too early now for that. But they were sky high. Which I guess isn't surprising. The first thing you think of is people who are married. You have to quarantine for a really long time, and that could be your spouse can drive you nuts. Your partner can drive you nuts. And it's a time, because of the anxiety that goes along with it, where the emotions are heightened and there are really intense feelings. And it kind of can create a perfect storm of sorts. I think that's, definitely what happened in my situation. So some of the reasons that I found, main themes for, why relationships were impacted, why they ended during the pandemic. So first we have quarantine was just too much. Kind of like I said before, you're with this one person, you can't really see other people, and little habits that maybe you didn't notice before are going to start coming out. Or, another thing that was mentioned was differences were just made more apparent by the fact that you were spending so much time together. Another issue, which is complete opposite, is long distance. People were in long distance relationships and who had to quarantine weren't able to fly to see each other or, drive to see each other in some cases. And that made it really difficult to sustain a relationship. So space, whether it be too much or too little, seems to be a really big theme. Another thing that came up is there are people with differing levels of comfort. I myself, my anxiety, my OCD, really, which I thought I was over, but surprise, the pandemic made it very apparent that I am not. The anxiety was just a lot. Even if, you're a pretty lax person, somebody who doesn't get anxious a lot, we were in completely unprecedented times. I remember my partner and I running to the Whole Foods at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. And that was when it really, really set in that shit was about to get real. I mean, people were already starting to hoard toilet paper. The aisles just were completely wiped of food. It was, frankly, terrifying. So I think that differing levels of comfort plays into that because, some people were less worried. And if you were somebody who was less worried and your partner was somebody who was a little more careful, then, that it just, you need to navigate that. And navigating that can be really difficult. And vice versa, if you are a person who is anxious and your partner, just cares less or is less worried about it, doesn't mean that they don't care, but they're less worried about it, that can exacerbate your anxiety even more. So I definitely think that plays into it as well, the differing levels of comfort. And that kind of plays into the next point, which is mental health and stress. Like, look, we were all fucking going through it during the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic technically, but in those beginning stages, the unprecedented time that we're talking about in early 2020, we were all going through it. And there were studies that showed that a lot of people's mental health was suffering. And I know I was one of them. I think that everybody, had difficulties in that area in one level or another. But that can be a struggle for a couple as well. If you are having mental health issues and your partner feels like the only person that you can lean on, well, that's not very fair to put all of that pressure on one person. And it can take a toll. It can absolutely take a toll. And so I think that what I got was that in a lot of cases, most people mentioned that it just became too much. The strain, it just became very strained and it just became too much. Another thing that came up was finances. Finances are already the number one leading cause for divorce. So I guess it's not surprising that it would, again, I'm using this word a lot, but be exacerbated by the pandemic, especially when the levels of unemployment were so high. So, finances, space, mental health, and just differences becoming more apparent over the course were kind of the main themes that I found. I am going to link 2 articles in the episode notes, one from the New York Times and one from the BBC, which kind of, talk about exactly what I just did. The New York Times article is kind of about how to navigate that feeling of isolation during the breakup, and the BBC article kind of explains, some of the reasons that I've outlined here. Thank you to everybody who gave me, your story, your information for how this impacted you. That's what I like to do, is to hear people's stories. And I'm really sorry that you have gone or are going through that. I know it's really, really tough. I'm just going to read a little clip from the BBC article because this section really resonated with me. Relationship experts believe that even strong couples who weren't facing problems before the pandemic and avoided major shifts in household health or dynamics may also be susceptible to breakups. This is because the pandemic has taken away well-established routines that offered comfort, stability, and rhythm, explains Ronan Stillman, a psychotherapist and spokesperson for the UK Council for Psychotherapy. Shout out. Without these, this leaves partners with limited opportunities to seek other forms of support or stimulation beyond their relationship, which can put them under strain. Stillman says more people are finding themselves trapped in a situation where they're struggling to cope with what's going on for them, as well as what's going on between them. Like a pressure cooker that does not let any pressure out, the lid can eventually pop and the relationship breaks down. Didn't I call in the last episode this entire thing like a pressure cooker? The idea of relationships in the pandemic being a pressure cooker, just so many things. One person's your source of support and it just kind of blows up. Like, I think that really sums it up. Perfect storm, pressure cooker, all those analogies. But yeah, for me, it was really interesting to, kind of hear what other people's experiences were, get a sense of what happened in individuals' lives and how that impacted their relationships. Because let's be honest, that's what it is, right? What's happening in your individual relationships is impacting how you are interacting with another person, which impacts the relationship. So thank you very much, everybody, again, for sharing that. We're going to do a quick segue. So in early 2020, I also read a lot of articles about concerns for people who were in abusive relationships during the early stages of major quarantine, and how scary that is because there's no escape at that point. You feel even more isolated than usual. So we're going to be talking about abusive relationships today. This is your content warning. I am going to be interviewing author Christina Hoag. It's a very, very good conversation. You know, we did have an article with my friend B last year about her experience leaving an abusive relationship. And so I tried to space this one out a little bit further. But you know what? It happens to multiple people. So there's just going to be different stories about it because different people have different experiences. So content warning for the second half of this episode. You know, it might be a little dark and could be triggering for some listeners. Christina is an author, Skin of Tattoos, most recently Law of the Jungle, which is a novella, and today we're going to be talking about her young adult novel, Girl on the Brink, which is about her experience in an abusive relationship, but put against the backdrop of a teenager's life, because as she says, she thinks it's very important that people notice the signs early in life and be aware of them as you go into dating. So I have been reading Girl on the Brink, and it's a difficult read. It's not that it's a bad book. It's because the subject matter is tough, and it quite honestly reminds me quite a bit of my first relationship when I was a teenager. Just the possessiveness that the guy has, how he kind of treats the girl like an object or like she's a prize that he gets to show off, and just kind of how volatile it can all be when you ask for space or try to get some distance, and how they just kind of suck you back in again. So I have to read it only a little by little, kind of chapter by chapter, because it hits so hard. And while it's good to have, content out there that is educational and relatable, it can also be difficult. So it's definitely worth a read, especially, to hear the signs. A good book to, share with your daughters and your sons. So I guess with that, we're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then you will get to listen to Christina tell her story right after this.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, an actual play podcast in the game world of Masks, a new generation. Join our heroes as they struggle to build a team and save the city. Can Titan escape the shadow of his mentor burnout? Is Soul's overwhelming power too dangerous to control? Will Muse discover her past? And how does White Knight stomach all those strange snacks? Listen to Delinquent Comics to find out at allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. New issues become available to all citizens every other Monday.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am here today with my guest storyteller, Christina Hoag. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing okay, hanging in there.
Yes.
Life is good. We're all here and alive. So, what more can we ask for, right?
Right. And finally, I think we're emerging slowly but surely out of this pandemic.
Yes, I know.
It's been a terrible year.
It really has. So we're getting closer though. And that's again what matters. So we're gonna be talking about some kind of serious topics today. So just for our listeners to let them know. But yeah, let's kind of just start with tell me about who you are and what your story is. Feel free to take as much time as you want. I know that it might be a little longer, so I just might ask questions as we go in.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, as Rachel said, I'm Christina, and it's about 13 years ago, I got involved in an abusive relationship. And, just a little bit, I guess, of background on me. I'm a journalist, and I was at that time. I was working at a newspaper reporter at the time. And and I write books, and now I freelance write and edit and work on my fiction. So that's kind of what I do. And then the story we're going to be talking about is yeah, about how I got myself into this abusive relationship, and more importantly, how I got myself out. As
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure many people realize, it's usually easier to get yourself into things than it is to get yourself out, you know.
Definitely true.
Yes. So, but it was it was kind of a watershed experience in my life. It definitely taught me so much about human nature and human relationships and just people in general. And in a strange way, I'm even thankful I went through it. It was a very
Hmm.
painful experience, obviously, and just very humiliating and a whole bunch of things. But ultimately, it made me a better person, and just a more, I think, aware person of, people's problems that they have.
Definitely.
Yeah. So when I met this guy, I was actually living in Miami. Now I live in Los Angeles, and he came on really strong at first, which is very typical of an
Mm.
abuser. It's they call it love bombing, for
Yes.
the
Yes.
term. And I was extremely flattered by this. And I just thought, I mean, I literally thought this was like a movie, a Hollywood movie coming true. This guy
Yeah.
was calling me. He lived in California. He would call me at all hours of the day and night. Oh, Christina, I just wanted to hear your voice. Oh, I just wondered what you're doing. I just can't get you out of my mind. All this kind of stuff. And I was just sort of really taken aback. I didn't really know what to do. And he's, sending me flowers, flying across the country on a Friday afternoon on an impulse. I just had to see you, all this kind of stuff. And it was just very, again, it just seemed like it was out of a movie. And I
Hmm.
thought that I had found the one, and he just basically swept me off my feet, that whole thing. And I hadn't known him, or I had known him for a little while before we actually got, and I was going out with someone else, and he just kept calling me, and we were friends, and our phone calls gradually got longer and longer, and finally I broke up with the guy I was seeing, who I didn't like that much, actually. So anyway, I got rid of it. So I said, "Oh yeah, you'll be pleased to know I've got out." He's like, "Oh, you can finally go out with me then." I said, "Yes." And we went to a restaurant, Miami Beach, and it was sunset, and this warm breeze, in the evening. And in Miami, it's very warm in the evenings. And I just had a glass of wine, and he just sort of looked at me and just said, "Tell me all about yourself." And I felt myself sort of literally just kind of slipping right into that smile
Hmm.
he had. It was just like this really um, surreal kind of experience. And I just, started talking about myself, which was very unusual for me, because I'm actually kind of a shy person. And, my career as a journalist was always ideal for me, because the focus is always on the interviewee, not the
Hmm.
interviewer. And so I had always just kind of focused on other people rather than myself. And to have someone just all of a sudden want to know every detail of my life was just, it was really powerful. I felt like empowered or validated, that I hadn't often felt like that. And, that was just it. I think it was just that moment that it just sort of, this guy's really into me for myself. It wasn't sex, it wasn't anything else. He just seemed really enamored of me,
Yeah.
and I hadn't really felt that before. Embarked on this very heady romance. And as I said, he was just all over me at the time, calling me at work, calling me at home, and coming over and all this sort of stuff. And then gradually, strange, odd things started cropping up. He needed sort of taking care of. I had to take him. He threw up one time. He had like a blood clot in his stomach because he had stomach problems. I ended up taking him to the hospital, and oh, thank you so much. I don't have anyone to do that for me. So he made me feel really like needed.
Sure.
He was always losing things, his keys. So one day I actually came back from work to my house where he was staying and looked for his car keys, and found them right there in the front yard, this kind of thing, and took off work to take him to a specialist, and then came, drove all the way from Miami to Fort Lauderdale, then back to work, then back up to Lauderdale, then back. And he's just like, oh, he was just so grateful, and I was just this, perfect person, and you're the one for me, and just a couple weeks into this whole thing, he was saying, I love you, and I said, well, actually, you don't really know me. How can you even say that? And he's like, oh, I know, I know, I'm older than you. And he was older than me. And so I've been around, and I know, I know when you're the one for me, and I know what this is. And so then, it was just like this full on assault. So even if and in fact, so things kind of, these odd things kept cropping up. And then, I don't know, maybe a month or two into the relationship, he started getting weirdly jealous of my next door neighbor. And he once blocked me. She came to the door to see me, and he would sort of block me at the doorway. And I was like behind him, and he was saying, no, Christina can't talk to you right now. She's not available, or she doesn't want to talk to you, or stuff like that. And I'm like behind him, but he wouldn't let me talk to the neighbor. And I thought that was really weird. So of course she thought that was, totally weird, which it was, total red flag. And if I would call him on these things, he'd be like, I'm just looking out for you. And everybody was jealous of me. Everybody, people are jealous of you, Christina. You don't really realize your own worth. You shouldn't hang out with her. What are you doing hanging out with her? You shouldn't, you should be with someone your own level, and blah, blah, blah. And every friend that I had, he wanted to meet all my friends, but then he would kind of put them down in this weird it was almost like a backhanded compliment to me, because they were being jealous of me because I was so great. But, they didn't deserve being friends with me. I mean, it was like this weird sort of thing. So it was very hard to counteract that kind of reasoning. And then one night, he was the first sort of real sign. We went to a casino, and it was with some friends of hers, and there were some guys there, some couples. And so I walked ahead of the group a little bit with one of the guys, just talking or whatever, and he started yelling at me. He was behind me and started yelling at me to get him a glass of water. And I'm like, and I just ignored it. I'm like, by this time I was like, why? I'm not his servant, why should I run away and get him water or whatever? And so then he just stormed off into the sort of, he just left us, and everybody thought this was really weird. And so I just got, hung out with the group, and when we went to the bar, had a drink or something. So like half an hour later, he shows up, and he just starts yelling at me in the middle of the casino bar, and calling me an asshole, and you're just one of them, and blah 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 blah. And I said, I want to go home, and this was before the days of Uber and stuff like that, and he had, of course, had driven, and it was actually a fair way from my house, so I didn't know how I was going to get home. But still, I said, I want to go. Well, I'll take you home. I brought you here. I'll take you home. So I'm like, okay, fine. So I agreed to that. And then he just harangued me the whole time, and after he pulled off the highway and just sat there and then just harangued me about my behavior. And then he went into profuse, apology mode. I don't know what happens to me. I'm just so in love with you, and blah, blah, blah. Please forgive me. And at the end, of course, I had to forgive him, because he actually wouldn't move the car unless I said, okay, I want, it was like this false imprisonment type thing. And he wouldn't budge the car unless I said I forgave him. That was the only way I was going to get home. And so things just sort of started piling up. But again, the high that I got from him was just so intense. Then he would do things, it made him very, very difficult to sort of break it off with him. Then, like one weekend we went to Key West, and he just treated me like this princess. He, tucked me in on the beach, went and got me drinks. Then he, drew me a bath in the hotel room, and he paid for the whole thing at this expensive place. Um, so then he treated, I was back up on this pedestal again, so it
Yeah.
was just like this crazy sort of, pulling me off the pedestal, then putting me back on the pedestal. And it was just, so it was like constantly my mind was spinning. I didn't know where I was or what I was doing, and he wouldn't leave you. And of course, now with the benefit of hindsight, I see this is typical abuser
Definitely.
behavior, because they don't leave you, give you enough time to think. That's why they're always on top of you and controlling
Hmm.
you, and they don't
Constant
want you
whiplash.
to, right, and they don't, and they keep you sort of on this edge. And then he's finally started this thing that you have to come to LA. And I said, I don't know, I was settled or whatever. I had a house and all this stuff, and well, come out. I'll pay for you to come out, and you'll see how nice it is, or blah blah blah. So I said, okay. So then again, that happened. This was the second, and this time it was a really scary blow up. We went out to dinner with a bunch of people. We left, got in his car. Then he went to a gas station. He went to pay at the gas station, came back, and it was like a Jekyll and Hyde um, change, conversion. I mean, and his
Mm.
face was all contorted, and he was in this terrifying rage, and just started in on me, that I was flirting with all the guys, that the waiter told me I was screwing one guy in the, at the table and in the hallway by the bathrooms, and blah blah blah. I saw you, this guy, and you just wanted to do this and that, and I mean, and it was just like this crazy thing. And then he drove off, and I didn't know where I was. Of course, we went to his office, and
Mm.
then we were there in his office, and I wanted to go home. I said, I want to leave. I want to leave. And he wouldn't leave. And then he was on the phones, yelling about me. This, called me a name. What did he call me? A scumbag or a bitch or something. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. So I just lay on this couch face down and thought, well, maybe I just won't react. And then, of course, he started coming over and shoving me with his knee, get up, get up. And finally, we got
Right.
back to his place, and then I said, I'm leaving. I just wanted to get to the airport. I was going to take a taxi to the airport, just get on the first plane to anywhere. And then he just grabbed my wrist and threw me. And luckily, I landed against the bed, not the dresser.
Mm.
And I was a little stunned, and I could see he was holding his fist like, he was going to do something else, and he was holding himself back, I think, and he's really tense. And then he changed again into this profuse apology mode, and, oh, I didn't mean it, oh, I'm so sorry, you can't leave, you don't want to ruin what we have. And I said, no, no, I'm going to leave. And he he's like, okay, I'll let you go, but I'm going to take you to the airport. No, I said, I'm just going to take a taxi. No, no, no. And then he blocked me, followed me kind of down the hall, and then he blocked me at the door again, and I couldn't get out. And I just felt so like overcome and so terrified. And now he was being nice again. It was almost like he was rescuing me from himself.
From himself. Yeah.
And so then I felt incredibly grateful that he had changed. And so then I sort of melted back into said, okay, and of course I did want the relationship, the good relationship, the one where I was treated like a princess, not this weird mental, breakdown thing. These rages he would go into. So that sort of, then I guess he knew that I would survive these his rages, because he knew very well that he had a tendency to go into these rages. So then I was hooked, and then finally he sort of harangued me and browbeat me, and I agreed to move to LA. I was going to rent out my house. I said, well, in case it doesn't work out, oh, you're not committed to this relationship, blah 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 blah, and I want to marry you. I want to have a baby with you. All this stuff. I'm gonna, you know. You can be a screenwriter in LA. You can be a star. You're so much talented. You're wasted out here in Miami. This is, blah blah blah, you're not going to get another chance. Like, I mean, it was just on and on and on until finally I gave in,
Yeah.
and I moved. And it was pretty soon after that that I knew I had made a massive mistake,
Did
because
you move
then
separately or did you move in with him?
I moved in with him.
Yeah. Okay. Scary.
We got this apartment, but then it turned out that all the stuff, he had no credit rating. He couldn't have a bank account for some reason, and so I had to get the apartment in my name, and I mean, it was just all these weird things that I just couldn't figure out how he lived, And I thought he had a lot of money because he was always spending a ton of money, and he didn't. This was all show. And again, he did. He spent a lot of money. He didn't have a money to keep going like that. So it was just this crazy thing. And of course, soon after that, I was pulled off the pedestal more and more, and it took longer and longer for me to put back up on the pedestal. And maybe it was, I don't know, a month later or 2 months later, I was off the pedestal forever. I was just, now trapped, basically. And I'd
Yeah.
given up my job. I'd, given up my house. And it was just these really terrifying rages that he would go into. One time he left me stranded at the beach. And I went, he was on the phone talking business really loudly. I was bored. So I just went, down the beach for a walk. When I came back, he'd left me. And he'd left just my sandals were there, and a book. And this woman, who had seen the whole thing, she's like, "Are you married to him?" And I said, "No." She's like, "Leave him." And then another woman said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I didn't even have my phone. He took my purse." And so I saw a sheriff's car, and I went to the sheriff and I said, "My boyfriend just left me stranded. Can I borrow your phone?" So he's like, "Oh, okay." He handed me the phone, and I called him. "Well, I'll come back for you when I feel like it." So I don't know. I waited like a couple hours, and he finally came back for me and started railing at me. Everything was my fault, and I just didn't know what to do. And it sounds, probably to some listeners and to people, they're like, "Well, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you just get up and go?" It just wasn't easy, and I can't really explain it. And I've read a lot about abusive relationships and domestic violence since then, and it's all I can say is it's like an addiction. Nobody has a really
Mm-hmm.
good explanation for how they really get this emotional hook in you.
Right.
Um, Almost maybe it's trauma bonding, because they put you through such trauma, and then when they change back,
Mm-hmm.
again, you're kind of like grateful that they're
Right. No, I think that when you said like it was like he was rescuing you from himself, I think that that's like there's such two extremes, right? That I feel like there's this relief that you have that you're not in the bad extreme anymore, quote unquote. Like you're in the good extreme.
right, right.
That's really, yeah. Wow. So how long like did this go on fully, do you think, if you put a
Well,
timestamp on it?
it was about a year and a half. So, I mean, it
Okay.
got, it just, spiraled downward increasingly. And I knew something was wrong with him. He had all these weird behaviors. He was addicted to Oxycontin as well, which he got
Mm-hmm.
he had a legitimate reason for it and went to a doctor. And this was kind of a little bit before the whole, awareness about opioids. But I
Sure.
knew something was wrong about it. He just loved pills. He would take all, and at one point he wanted me to take all these pills. And I'm like,
Ooh,
no,
yeah.
no. So that didn't, a lot of things he tried to get me to do, I didn't go along with, luckily, and he kind of dropped them. But it was just, crazy until finally I felt like I was the one that was crazy. And I said, "You need to see someone, you need to get medication or, because he knew something was wrong with him. And, he's like, I don't, you just don't know what it's like being me. I have this huge black hole inside me. He'd had an abusive childhood. So I felt really sorry for him and I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
help him. That was the other thing, the other dynamic that sort of came into it was that I wanted to help him. And I just thought, well, if he could get cured or, get on meds or something, we'd have the perfect relationship. I mean, this was a guy that I actually told this to. I said, "I think you're the angel sent to me from heaven. you're the angel that I deserve, that I've been seeking my whole life. I mean, that's, how sort of brainwashed I was, or how deep he had sort of penetrated my
Mhm.
psyche. He knew what I needed, I guess, in some weird way. And so I really gave it a shot of trying to get him to a therapist. I got him names of therapists and, called, and he never went. He never went. And he just said, I've tried to do that. It's just too painful. I just can't do it. But in the meantime, I just, it became impossible. And I felt like I was going crazy. I was losing my sense of self. I didn't know who I was anymore.
And you left everything.
Yeah. And with this total like emotional abuse. And luckily he never got physically abusive. It wasn't like he hit or punched or kicked me. But he did other kinds of physical abuse, like driving really fast, which I later
Mhm.
learned were signs of physical abuse, like driving super fast on the highway to scare me,
Right.
towering over me. He was over 6 foot, so he'd tower over me, yell in my face, punch the wall, um, you know, talk about that he had guns. Some friend of his out although in New York, had guns. And I was like, okay. And, I mean, this kind of weird thing. I have friends who are cops. These weird sort of little hints to make me
Yeah.
frightened of something. But finally, I went to a therapist. And again, I couldn't tell him that. I knew he wasn't going to approve. And, I finally got myself there and told her, a little bit of this story. And she said, you're in an abusive relationship and you've got to get out. She said, it will be probably the hardest thing you've ever done, but you have to do it. And, she was right. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I definitely did have to do it. But it took me months to finally get away from him. I finally moved out. That was a whole other scene. I was sort of moved into a hotel. I didn't know he didn't know where I was. He went searching for me. He told me later, in hotels and stuff. And then I had a friend of a friend who was going on a trip. So I moved into it. She said, you can use my place for a while. So I used her place. But then he would follow me. He would,
Mm-hmm.
again, he found out where I was because he would stalk me. He found out where and then I got a job. So, I ended up getting back together with him, although I wasn't living with him. And that was a key thing because I had that
Sure.
space now. And I also was going to the therapist and stuff. But that key thing was getting the space. And I could just see that this guy was nuts, but still I couldn't like break it off entirely until a couple months later. It took me a couple months later. And again, it was almost like weaning yourself off an
Exactly.
addiction.
Well, it's
And
like when you feel unsafe, like I mean, it's like I feel like we as women try to explain a lot of men don't understand why we might be so kind to men that are being gross and hitting on us.
mhm.
And it's because like if you feel unsafe, sometimes it's easier and better to be polite for your own safety.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
it's kind of
yeah,
the same thing here for your own safety. Like you needed to create space slowly. You couldn't just do it all at once.
yeah. And so it was winding down, and finally I managed to just bring down the iron. Like the therapist said, you just have to bring down that iron curtain, and you've got to hold it there. And again, he then, once I sort of said that's it, he called. I had to change my number twice. He went to the Sprint place and actually got my phone number, which is illegal for them to do. And I had to later lodge a complaint with Sprint about that. He had this uncanny ability he would push people to do things they didn't want to do, including
Right.
myself. And as I said, he stalked me, he cyber stalked me. I had to block him on every sort of email, social media. He would call me at my job. I got a job as a reporter, and I had to work late nights sometimes. And he would call me when he knew I was the only one in the newsroom,
Ugh.
and I'd pick up the phone. Oh, I'm right outside, and I'd be like, oh shit, And then, but there was I once called down to the security guard and I said, "Is there anyone there?" And he said no. And But all this kind of stuff, and it kind of went on, and then he would like go underground for a while, then he would pop back up, and then he would be all quiet for a while, then he'd pop back up, until finally I thought I'd a year later I thought I finally got rid of him. And all of a sudden, I had the sheriff's deputies serving me with papers for a restraining order. And everything that he'd done to me, he had his friends trying to, his friends would call me, and he would be like right there, telling them what to say and things like that. He found out where I was one time in Florida at my mother's and flew down. I mean, he had just had this way of finding out stuff. And so all the stuff that he did to me, he alleged that I did to him, and he was going to get a restraining order against me. And again, I freaked out. I was just so scared. I didn't know what to do. I had to go to this court hearing. That the preliminary order had already been granted, so now I had to go show up at a hearing there's a second hearing to make the temporary order permanent, for 3 to 5 years is usually the term. And so I filed a response to the court. I got a little bit of legal advice. You have to file this response. So that's, I filed it. And his argument was just complete. His filing that the paperwork was almost illegible. I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, it looked like a crazy person. So I filed this very reasoned response. It was later a lawyer told me it was probably a little too long, but she said yeah. Then I went to the hearing. Then he got the hearing continued. He wanted more time to look for a lawyer or something. So the judge granted it, and then he would, he kind of leered at me in the hallway and would say these things. And finally, I went over and stood by the sheriff's deputy in the courthouse, and I said, can I just stand by you, because he's scaring me, and he keeps, coming up to me and saying things. Now, the way restraining orders work, he can actually, because the order was against me,
right?
I couldn't say anything to him, but he could come to me and say anything he wanted. That's the way it is. Yeah. So actually, luckily, I knew this. I had done a bit of legal research, and so I never responded, because if I had responded, I would automatically be in violation of the order, which is a whole other thing. So I stood with the sheriff's deputy, and then he staked out the entrance to the courthouse after the court hearing, and I could see him there with a bunch of people. And I just went back to the sheriff's deputy. I said, I'm really scared to go by him. He's doing, and she said, "Don't worry, I'll get you out of the back door." So I left by the back door. And then so then I just decided, after 2 continuances and trying to do this on my own, I got a lawyer. I actually found a domestic violence support group, and through that I got a lawyer. And she looked at his filing. She said, this never should have gone through. This is ridiculous. So the next time, he got the shock of his life when I showed up with a lawyer, and the judge threw it out. The judge just tossed it. But I mean, and then luckily he disappeared after that. I didn't see him anymore. Maybe one time in a parking lot or something. Again, he would yell if I was with someone. He would he would never say anything. But if I was by myself, then he'd yell something. If there was no witnesses. So.
Wow. So it was the legal thing that was the thing that made him fuck off eventually.
Yeah, because I think he knew at that point. I mean, I could go after him for harassment, because that's what my lawyer said. This is actually harassment, and my client is, she broke it off with him, and he's, this is a revenge, and that's what I'd stated in my court response. So he was, So I think he knew that, if he did anything more, I could really go after him, and I would have at that point. I had a lawyer, I had legal advice. So, and I started going to the support group, and it just, it was just like this saving thing that I found that other people had gone through the same exact thing. As that people, women went around the table telling their stories. I mean, change a few details, and it was my own story.
It's so scary. Again. Yeah. I've heard the story. I've lived the story,
it's the same across the board. It's almost like, wait, did we all date the same person?
Right, right. It's
Yeah.
really it's bizarre how this happens. And so then I read some books about it too, and and then everything made sense, and of course I had misinterpreted all these red flag warnings, that should have told me he was a dangerous person. But I didn't know. Again, all his calling me and rushing to see me, that was all about controlling me. It was about also the love bombing thing, but it was also about establishing control and checking up
Mhm.
on me, stuff like that.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to find that freedom eventually. I mean, that, you found the strength to be able to walk away from it, and that you found the support that you needed, and that you were able to heal from it too. I mean, I know that it's really hard for many people to talk about this, but I mean, you've clearly, done a lot of work, and you wrote a book about the experience too, which must have been really healing.
Yeah, I mean, this was my thing. So after that, and it took a long time, and I mean, one of the things people don't, reasons why survivors don't really talk about it is just the shame. I mean, you just feel so
Yes.
humiliated. How did you ever, just asking myself, how did I go along with this? Why did I see this? Why didn't I just leave? Why did, after that first thing, I should have just, said, fuck you. But why did I keep going back and things like that? But again, and I went to the support group, I found that was totally normal behavior for that kind
Absolutely.
of relationship. And so eventually, a couple years later, I really felt strongly that I wanted to write a book. But I didn't want to write a memoir. It was just too raw.
Yeah.
I just couldn't go there. So I wrote a novel and called Girl on the Brink, and I made it a young adult novel. So the heroine, the protagonist, is a 17-year-old reporter, and she again, it sort of mirrors the progression of my relationship, but in a much teenage kind of way.
Mhm.
But I also have her after the breakup, and what I read some other YA books about this subject. It usually ends at the breakup, and so I went further with my book, and I showed because you have to do a lot of work, and sometimes it's the hardest thing is after that breakup is one to stay broken up, and two
Yeah.
to get over the shame and humiliation of it.
Right.
So I had her, and go to the support, find the support group, and eventually heal. And she writes poetry about it and stuff like that. So um, yeah, and that was I just felt like I had to do something, and I'm a writer, I write. So that was the way my small contribution to the goal of, educating people about domestic violence. And it's funny, whenever I speak about this book and to writing groups or to libraries or, just general audiences, I always have people coming up to me, sometimes with tears in their eyes, saying, "This happened to me."
Yeah.
Or I was married for 14 years, to an abusive man. I
Oh
finally
my
got away.
gosh.
And, thank you so much for writing this. But again, it's just so common. That's what blows me away all the time.
Yeah, it really is. It's funny that when you talk about, you just would get you flowers, you felt like you were in. That's something that I hear all the time. It's like, this is what I want, right? This is what you're told that you should want. This is what all of those movies tell us what romance is. So
Hmm.
why does it feel, it's so common. The amount of times that I hear the story, like you said, like the details change, but wow, yeah, it's really
Yeah, it's basically the
incredible.
same story. And it was only a year and a half of my life, but it felt like 10 years.
Of
Really
course.
did.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I got it to, it really feels like 10 years. It felt like so much longer because it was just such an intense thing. And it was just this up and down and, the emotional manipulation and the abuse and
Absolutely.
stuff. It was just, horrendous.
Where do things stand now? Like with you and your life, and I don't know if you know anything about, what he's doing, but
I have no
yeah.
idea what he's doing. He did like a year ago. It was 10 years, almost to the I think 10 years to the last court date. And I get this, I still block him on Facebook and all
Mm-hmm.
these social media things. And so I get this odd message, via Messenger. Oh, so and so, needs to speak to you urgently. Please call him at blah 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 blah. And it was some, random person. Then my stepmother got the same message, and then I got another message on LinkedIn, and it was felt so good when I got this message, and I realized it was 10 years, also, basically to the day of that last court thing. Maybe he thought it was enough time, and I just deleted it. I didn't feel anything. It just felt great not to feel anything, because the couple times after the breakup I'd seen him in a couple places, I would have this
Mm-hmm.
huge physical reaction. My stomach would churn, my legs would feel like flimsy, like I was gonna, my neck, I would tremble. My
Yeah.
knees would kind of tremble.
You had PTSD.
Um, yeah, I no longer, I just, I felt nothing.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
incredible.
yeah, and I thought, wow, that was just such a great feeling. Just, fuck you. You
Yeah.
think I'm going to fall for that again?
Uh-huh.
And I actually saw him like a few months ago during the pandemic. I was just walking along Main Street here in LA, and I hear my name, and I turn around, and there he is.
Oh
And I
no.
just raised my hand. I kind of like swiped my hand in the air like a fly, and just turned around and kept walking. I just felt so it felt great, and now I'm actually a volunteer facilitator at the same support group that I went to.
Oh wow.
I took a training. You have to be in California, take 40 hours of state training to be a domestic violence counselor. So I did that during the pandemic, and it was all on Zoom. And so now I'm go once a week and facilitate the support group, and so it feels good. That's hopefully lending my experience, strength, and hope to this journey of people going through the same thing.
Absolutely. What
Yeah,
advice do you
I
have
have.
for somebody who's dealing with like, those feelings of like guilt and shame?
Yeah, when you are not alone, this happens incredibly. It's incredibly common. Find a support group. There are many of them. Call the national hotline or the local hotline for domestic violence. They can refer you to one or to a shelter that will know of a support group. Because it really is so healing when you're with a bunch of people who know exactly what you're going through and how you
Right.
feel. Because this is such a thing, so misunderstood, and it's not well understood even by professionals, psychologists and all that. But to the outsider, it's like, well, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just leave? Really, you're to blame because you stayed in it. I mean, this is what people say. Or wasn't
Right.
that enough for you, Christina? That, you went back, and and makes you feel like a total, idiot. And there's not a lot of sympathy for victims of domestic violence. In fact, it becomes, there's a lot of victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can find a lot of strength in finding a support group, and just know that you're not alone, and this is incredibly common. And one thing I've learned that it happens to people of all socioeconomic classes. There have been women who are doctors who have
Mm-hmm.
been in abusive marriages, have been abused by doctors and lawyers. There have been teenagers, as well, teen mothers abused, and everything in between. All races, ethnicities, religions. It goes across all boundaries. This is a global thing. Um, so it's, you are by no means alone, and, because you feel very alone. Because one of the
Yes.
things too is that they isolate you. That's one of the tactics, is they isolate you from friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
So often you are alone. But even when you get out of it, you're still alone.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, where can people find you? Where can they, I know you also do speaking events. Maybe you'll be doing more of those when the
yeah.
pandemic is, coming
Yes.
down. Are you writing?
Yeah. I'm writing. I'm working on a mystery story, which is actually about a sexual assault.
Okay.
And that, and I've spoken about this a couple times at like women's groups, and again had the same reaction, people coming up to me, and I've got a new edition of Girl on the Brink coming out. It's also an audiobook.
Okay.
I have one paperback copy left because I ordered a whole bunch for different events before the pandemic, and of course that shut down everything. So I have one
Yes.
copy left. So if anybody wants to personalized signed copy, $15 with all
Nice.
mailing charges, with the mailing and shipping and all that stuff included. But you can find me on my website, ChristinaHoag.com, and sign up for my website and, look for the book on Amazon and all that sort of thing.
Definitely.
And Audible, yeah.
Yeah. I guess my last question is, like, how do you feel changed because of this experience? And what do you hope that other people take away from your story?
Yeah, that this can happen, and people, again, I have a college degree. I was a professional journalist. I'd done so many things. I'd won prizes, and and I've seen one lawyer I went to, and I told him some of the story. I could just see the puzzlement look of him looking at my face, like, how did you get into this? It can happen to anyone. It really can, and it's just so. Yeah, it just I just want people to educate themselves. I really think this should be taught in like high school as part of sex
Absolutely.
education.
Mm-hmm.
These red flag signs, because they're very clear once you know what they are.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
about the control, the isolation, the emotional manipulation, the love bombing, like the profuse apologies, and all that stuff. But I feel, yeah, I mean, as far as it's changed me, it's just opened my eyes. I just didn't know that kind of thing existed. I just thought, first when I heard, that therapist say about domestic violence and abuse, and I was like, well, that just happens to like women in like housing projects. I mean,
Right.
that's, yes, I was a snob, and it doesn't. It's not. It's not at all.
It's
So
a lot
it's
of
just
people.
given
Yeah.
me, yeah, and just a much more keener insight into what mental illness is. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is not normal behavior,
No,
but
no. And I mean, hopefully he's getting the help that he needs.
yeah, I doubt it. They don't change, and
Right.
at the support group, they keep saying, we don't want to say it's a mental illness because that implies they're doing it in spite of, they can't help themselves, but they
Right.
do, they know what they're doing. They
Right.
really do. But there's obviously, it isn't normal behavior. So it's just made me a lot more, I guess I was naive, I just feel like I can see people and for more. I guess I thought everybody was okay, that some people were crazy, but they would be in a psychiatric facility, but they're not. There's a lot of crazy people out there, dangerous people, and not everybody is, um, as well meaning as one likes to think, I guess. So it was kind of a rude awakening to human
Yeah.
nature.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm so sorry that had this experience, but I love that you're taking your experience and using it as an education tool. Especially, I mean, I have such a soft spot in my heart for young adult novels, and I wish that I had had a book like this when I was 14, 15. So I'm really glad that people out there have access to a story like this, especially the part that you talked about with the healing afterwards. I mean, the work doesn't stop after a breakup. So, thank you for that work and for the work that you're
Oh,
continuing to do.
well, thank you for giving me a space to talk about it and helping spread the message as well. And I will say that another common thing and just is that you'll never have a healthy, that you kind of have this black mark against you. You'll never have a healthy relationship again, and that's not true.
Yeah.
That's a common feeling, and that is not true.
Yeah.
And,
No, absolutely.
you can survive and you can heal and you can recover and you can go on and just it's another thing that happened to you. That's
Yes,
all.
definitely. Yeah. We humans are resilient.
Hmm.
We persevere. So it's unfortunate that these things do happen, but it's also quite incredible to watch how people rise from the ashes, you know?
Yeah, I feel I'm a better person, for it. Actually, as I said, I'm weirdly, grateful for having
Mm-hmm.
this experience. I mean, I wouldn't really want to go through it again, but at the same time, like, okay, that happened to me. I grew
Right.
from it and overcame some pretty big hurdles, and I think I'm a better person for it. Weirdly,
Definitely. No,
so
I understand. I know how that goes. But thank you so much for being here and talking with me and, being so vulnerable and sharing your story. And are there any resources? I know you mentioned the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So I'll be sure to
yeah,
link that in the episode notes.
yeah, that would be great. Yeah, just there's usually like a county hotlines and things like that, but that one
Okay.
can definitely goes everywhere, and they'll link you to wherever you are, local
Awesome.
resources.
Well, thank you so much, Christina, for being here today. And listeners, thank you for standing witness, as always. And my name is Rachel Dalton. You have been listening to Wine, Dine, and 69. Let's keep talking.